Thank you very much. Actually, I'm extending a little bit what my friend Usama and also my friend Tamim asked about what is robotics for. And robotics is for engineering, of course, but it's also for science. And so why do we explore underwater, the underwater world? Because we are curious. Of course, we want to find something, but we also want to understand something. And so in this presentation, I'm going to talk about science, about engineering, about dreams, about imagination, but also about vision. Why? Because as the friends I nominated, but also many others have been around for a while in this field. So I can share with you many experiences, or essentially how some dreams became realities. You know, when I started working in surgical robotics in the 80s, many people believed that the very same idea of allowing a robot to perform surgery was crazy, and we were crazy, irresponsible people. Well, today, this is a well-established technology. In some areas, nobody would even dare to not to be operated by a robot, for example, in prostate cancer. And some people, like Dr. Catherine Moore, became a leading figure, showing also that this is an area for female engineers. So it's a collection, if you wish, of experiences that today seem natural, but were not natural at that time. Why? Because, again, engineering is a driver, but also science is a driver. Science fiction, in fact, is also a driver for, and it was a driver for me. Actually, it was also a driver for other people. For example, I mentioned here Professor Hirose, who admitted that he is one of the father of robotics, especially in Japan. He admitted to have been deeply inspired by cartoons, you know, like Astro Boys. So, you know, we should never underestimate the role of dreaming, okay, especially for students. It's not only the application that inspired and should inspire engineers, but also the dream of exploring new things, because we cannot predict, in fact, what innovation will be. I mentioned the case of Blade Runner, where cars could fly, but phone booths were part of the urban landscape. It means that science fiction at that time could not predict the advent of the iPhone. And this is something that motivates people very much. In a sense, is also the motivation of the Mbzirc IRC competition, you know. It's about something that has not been accomplished, could be accomplished. I go back to my ancestors in Italy, the Medici family. You see here, what they did in the Florence of the 15th century is to dream about a cathedral that would have been the largest in the world. They wanted to build this cathedral, but at that time, the technology of building the dome was not available. But the leaders at that time were visionary. They said, we are sure that this can be done. And so they launched a contest, exactly like Mbzirc IRC, if you will, for those who could propose a credible project, you know, for designing the dome. And they did, actually. Filippo Brunelleschi was not really an expert in the field. He presented a project that was accepted, and today the dome of the Cathedral of Florence is still the largest brick building ever built in the world, and it is considered the building of this dome as the single most important event that led to the explosion of the Renaissance. So you can see the role of vision. Actually, there is a strong difference between vision and imagination. I want you to think about that. Imagination is about tiny things. For example, many of the devices of the robot that you have developed and presented in the previous days were very imaginative. But the vision is about the context, okay? Is a long-term vision. Is made also of single innovations, but it contains the innovations within a framework. So the vision is something that really looks very far ahead, while you can spend all your life in being imaginative in many things without really having a vision. So I like just to point out the difference and the contest, the challenge we have been involved here is really about the vision that is then promoting a lot of imaginative solutions. And these things can be very practical. In fact, according to some authors, the Renaissance Florence, in which the dome was built, was a better model for innovation than Silicon Valley is. In a sense, it was extremely, it produced an explosion of great art and brilliant ideas and, in fact, wealth. So you could not, in fact, it's not possible to disconnect vision and dreams from real things, from reality. As I said, nobody could predict the advent, the introduction, the iPhone. It seems eras ago, but actually only 13 years ago, when Steve Jobs presented the iPhone, and at that time, Nokia, for example, was working on incremental innovations, okay? Roadmaps. But roadmaps are for incremental innovation. They do not predict disruptive innovation. In fact, this is the challenge, if you will. It's about not only designing and predicting a steady progress, but also trying to predict these discontinuities, or if you cannot predict, trying to be able to incorporate disruptive innovations here. And this is, while what I'm really talking about, where do most disruptive innovation come from? And reality is they come from science, and this is the second point, about imagination, dreams, vision, but also about the role of science. I think that in robotics, like Professor Khatib pointed out, we are really looking at understanding the details of, for example, how human beings behave, but also at the same time, we should consider and look very much what science is introducing. For example, you see this chicken, and you see here there are many, many topics that are very interesting. For example, the graceful behavior of a cat, or the incredible ability of cheetah, and anticipatory behaviors, or, in football, the anticipation is very important. This is what we as a jury observed in some of the performance in yesterday devices. It's about predicting, for example, the flying robot is about everything was about prediction, okay? Or the role of the vestibular system. Most robots did not have any vestibular system, in fact. This was introduced thanks to the MEMS technology, thanks to the gyros. But this is extremely important for performing many tasks. So a lot of scientific discoveries come on. And this is very important. For example, what I'm doing and I'm inviting my students to do is reading science and nature very much, because this is where disruptive innovation comes. For example, you look at the invention, discovery, if you will, of the blue LED. This is the core technology. Actually, it was a scientific discovery. All this discovery here granted the Nobel Prize to those who discovered it, in fact. And the guys who discovered the blue LED got the Nobel Prize, and today all our display, this very same display, is based on the RGB technology that is essentially based, was lacking, not the red, not the green LEDs, but the blue LEDs. When the blue LEDs was discovered, a revolution happened in lighting technology, but the same for lithium-ion batteries, Nobel Prize in chemistry, or for graphene, Nobel Prize in physics. And this is a very interesting time scale analysis of how, you see in the bottom, mathematical theories were developed, from Fourier analysis till the information theorem of Shannon and many others, and at the top, with a delay in general of 20 to 50 years, are the inventions. So you see the discoveries on the bottom and the inventions on the top. So a good way to understand where technology is going to be is reading and understanding where discoveries happen. So my strong invitation to all of you and to this community is not reading only our transactions. I'm editor-in-chief of a transaction, so I'm not, of course, talking bad for transaction, but looking at where science is, because this is an indication of where next inventions will probably come. And this is, in fact, an example how things happen. In 1949, Shockley and co-workers got the Nobel Prize for discovering the transistor, the physics effect of the transistor. And then in 1955, the transistor were introduced in computer, and then in MOS and in microprocessors, and then eventually in the robots. So the robots also took benefit of course, mechatronic system of the invention and the discoveries in physics. And there is also something that I mentioned in the title of my presentation that is about bionics. What is bionics? Bionics is also another very, very interesting emerging field, okay, that started at the time of Wiener and other about cybernetics. The idea of cybernetics is a unified approach to the study of living organisms and machines, leading to a concept that machines can be used not only to perform useful tasks, but also as scientific tools. Okay? This was introduced at that time by Wiener and others. And then in 1958 in the USA, the bionics was created through, you see, a meeting that was published on Science. And the idea was very much related to understanding deeply lifelike system that copies function from nature. And actually, again, 30 years ago, I co-organized with Giulio Sandini, Patrick Abisher, a workshop on bionics, okay? And you see to the right, many, many leading people presenting who were there. We were very young at that time, but people like, okay, I'm sorry for, I always forget. Okay, anyhow. Our guys from the Boston Dynamics, okay, were there, okay? And so incubating people like you, we don't know if some of you will become the developer of this kind of devices that are impressive. So at that time, we were talking about science, about CCD, retina-like sensor. And then here, Mark Raybert, at that time was a young investigator, is now the leader of Boston Dynamics. So we are nurturing, and this is our hope, that many of you young researchers who are involved in this competition will be the leaders of robotics in the future. So this is about science and engineering. You see, this is the area I really am interested in. It's a lot of engineering, but it's also a lot of science. And actually, I would say I'm very proud to have been part of the board that launched, together with Guangzhou Yang and other people who were in the board, science robotics. At that time, science robotics was again sort of a dream. Today, the impact factor is 19.4. That means that we have succeeded to bring robotics into the scientific domain, if you will, with a very, very high cited papers. So it's another contribution to the community. And of course, also on the engineering side, I'm working as the editor-in-chief on the IEEE transaction on medical robotics and bionics that is more oriented to engineering, to real robotics application. But you see the framework. And so we are talking about robot design primarily for scientific research. And this is a novelty, if you will. These things, what are the applications? Professor Asfour was asking, what are we doing underwater robotics? And one would say, why are we investigating basic manipulation or friction in worms, these kind of things? Okay, because we can use robots as scientific tools. Or, of course, we can use robots for a number of practical problems. Those are things that I and my co-workers have developed in these years in the Institute by Robotics. So we are very practical people also. Okay, but we had the vision about the progress of robotics, how to really look to the future. We can identify three main waves. The first wave, the wave of industrial robotics, in which we accumulated a lot of understanding about robotics. The second wave is about service robotics, and I believe that we are now at the frontier of a new wave, actually at the beginning of a new wave, that is about science-based robotics and a large number of applications like robot companion, for example. This is about the vision. And of course, we are looking, I go back to my interest in science fiction. Actually, iRobot depicting what could be Chicago in 2035, in my opinion, is extremely inspiring. Are we going to have this scenario with humans and robots coexisting and sharing? In fact, this is actually what I also agree with Usama. Human, and I said in my interview also yesterday. So humans are always in the center of these things. But then there are a number of topics to analyze. You may remember the two models of the robot companion, the so-called NS5 robot and the NS4 robot. NS4 robot is a good one, following the three laws of robotics. The NS5 is the robot in which the three laws of robotics have been cracked. We can speculate about that. But essentially, we can also speculate about one other prediction or vision, for example, the one by a Scientific American and Bill Gates. So one robot for each household? Well, if you look at those figures, you would be impressed. So we are talking about, and I'm sure that Rainer will also agree, as a KUKA person, if this would be possible, we are going to have a kind of industry that would have the same size as the car industry. Is this realistic? Well, for sure, innovation make dreams true. So we should be confident that what Asimov wrote in the 40s and 50s about iRobot, and then became, could benefit of the discovery of the transistor, and then by the invention, made by Engelberger, of a real robot taking advantage of the discovery. And you see this picture of Asimov and of Mbzirc together, and Mbzirc, and then the explosion of unpredictable technologies, like, for example, the smartphone technology, the MEMS, intelligence in every object, the invention of the web, the cloud computing, at the end, the cloud robotics. So this is something that is evolving gradually, and we should be ready, you are ready, to grasp each kind of innovation and to incorporate this innovation into robotics. But more practically, what are the key technology? Because again, we want to be engineers. And here is a list of the technology that would be backing the development of a future robot companion like in Chicago 2035. One issue is about force, and we can both monitor what is happening here and the figure that is, of course, the weight lifting capability, so the body weight versus the payload ratio, and you see how we are painfully going towards something reasonable, but we may also hope that there will be some disruptive innovation here, accelerating the achievement of the final result. It may be or not be. For sure, intelligence. Intelligence is something that is also getting disruptive innovations, okay? Semi-disruptive, because deep learning actually is not totally disruptive, but it is based very much on something that was not available before. Huge amount of data that comes from MEMS that were not predicted before. And in fact, even in science fiction, those of us who are old enough to remember 2001: A Space Odyssey, at that time, the artificial intelligence was considered to be incorporated in a single supercomputer, HAL 9000. Today, in iRobot, actually, intelligence is distributed, and this is what could not be predicted, the fact of connectivity. Yesterday, of course, all your robots were connected to the net. This was not possible 20 years ago. It is possible today. So the web is a revolution, and also the movement, let's say, to the understanding, the shift from the understanding of what centralized intelligence is toward what is decentralized intelligence. It is a very interesting concept that you can find in animals like the octopus. So that AI has a number of extraordinary successes, but also a number of problems that are still open, in fact. And in fact, this is one important issue. It's related to collaboration. Is another KPI, if you will, for the 2035 robots. So nobody, for example, was predicting the advent, or of course, we were dreaming, okay? Usama, we were dreaming about torque sensor. There are some very good examples of torque control, but at the same time, there are new and sometimes imaginative solutions. This is a startup companies in my institute, Nicola Vitiello and colleagues, that essentially is using very smart mechanical solution to develop a wearable robot. Actually, going back to Leonardo da Vinci's concept, a very smart torque control, if you will, with a spring. But of course, much more can be done. This is a dramatic, I like this very much, example of what Sami Al-Dadin did, and the incredible role that KUKA had. Europe has been a leading area for introducing compliant control in a dramatic way. See, this is a revolution, in fact. It's a revolution that essentially is leading to human and robot to collaborate. But then, of course, you can also consider another approach, having soft material. We have been working a lot on soft material. You know, it's about different ways of essentially exploring the properties of the body. So what I really claim is that we should consider as roboticists that intelligence is in the brain, but it's also a lot in the body. Nature makes use of a lot of smart solutions in which shape, arrangement, mechanical properties are used. We should not underestimate this, shifting entirely to traditional AI. Let's AI people do that. In robotics, we should consider AI, but also body intelligence very much, because robotics is about hardware. Robots have a body, are not bots, are not software programs playing in Wall Street. Okay, we should make this very clear. And in fact, this is also embodied intelligence is the modern view of artificial intelligence. Again, without saying that AI is not usable. I have to finish. I go quickly to the conclusion. But for example, the octopus, is an extraordinary example of how again, distributed intelligence and body intelligence, can be used in a smart way. This is the work of my colleague, Cecilia Lasky, and of course, co-workers, is about the intelligence, again, in the body. So smart body solution, material, shape, and so on. And this, in fact, it can also lead from basic science. Actually, volume 1, number 1 of Science Robotics published a paper on Cecilia Lasky, Barbara Mazzolai, Matteo Cianchetti about soft robotics, volume 1, number 1. So it means that we're talking about science, but then, of course, there are many applications, some of them in surgical robotics. Those are mostly collaborative projects. Or for assisting frail elders. So there are real applications and a lot of contribution, is about morphing, squeezing, resisting impact, self-healing, growing, extraordinary potential. Like also another field that is under investigated by us, that is about energy. Robotics is also about energy. This is a problem that we are not addressing enough, okay? Our drones fly 20 minutes. Most of the time, some teams used during reset was about changing batteries, okay? Is this tolerable? I think that is something that we really want to address. It's a very strong limitation. But of course, there is a race of materials, a lot of material, very new solution in material, cell, and other material that are coming. Till these new frontiers, about, for example, plant robotics. This is the work of my colleague, Barbara Mazzolai, and co-workers about an entirely new generation. It's a vision and is full of imaginative solution about plant-inspired robots. And I think I go to finish because it's... maybe I go quickly, very quickly, about the dream. Okay, this is another dream I have, actually a personal dream, developing an artificial hand. And, through decades, these things became practical, and helped a lot to establish international collaboration and also to educate very, very smart students who are now professors and both working in prosthetics and in robotics, A dream, again, that was transformed in engineering project, because this is what we do. And so about dexterity, size, weight, and connection to the brain. This was probably the most challenging task, but we succeeded, by developing a hand with connected to the nervous system by electrodes, and dealing at the end of to this kind of real activity. This is Silvestro Micera, my colleague, and it's about brain controlled bidirectional bionic prosthesis. It was science fiction, is today a reality, and more is coming about human-robot collaboration in manipulation. And these kind of things that have been developed by colleagues at APFL is fantastic. Is really making a person with severe spinal cord injuries walk again. This is something we should really be proud of as a community, by putting together a number of development. So it's coming. And of course, capsule endoscopy, going to the very small, is also another fantastic dream, essentially exploring all the tiny parts of the human bodies. And doing more things. Because when we go inside the body, we can do a lot of things, okay? Even developing solution for injection-less treatment of diabetes. So conclusion. This is, looking back, what we have done, okay? This is my perception. We really did a lot, okay, these years, developing not only robotics, but also science robotics, bionics, collaborating with many other communities, developing a number of real solutions, and developing grand visions, for example, about the humanoids, wearable robotics, bionic humans, and more. And together with colleagues in science robotics, we have tried to identify the grand challenges. So you see here a list of grand challenges about materials, about bio-inspired robot, about energy sources, about medical, brain-computer interfaces, and test with the real stakeholders, leading to another very important issue, that is regulating all these things. Okay? So this is an example in Europe about regulating robotics and AI. Very, very important. Actually, 2 years ago, I'm finishing, we also had a workshop, I like this very much, about the grand scientific challenges. And you see here the people who were there. Okay, Usama was there, and Giulio Sandini, and you see Toshi Fukuda, other, also Nakamura, and Kuniyoshi, and other, Asada. You see, those, we are getting old, okay? But we have been still, for this maybe, we are able to suggest a number of key topics, and you see here our visions about this. You know, what are our ideas about the grand scientific challenges that could really be, should be addressed by robotics community. I can tell you what is my own, and I finish. My own grand challenge, I will not do that, but, you know, is about graceful behavior, the science and technology of graceful behavior. I'm not really fascinated by supercomputers. I'm fascinated by cats, for example. And I think all of us should be fascinated more by looking at this kind of behavior than to supercomputing only. Please think about how cats or dancing people behave. It's a fantastic challenge. Okay? There is everything. There is intelligence, there is perception, there is emotion, there is human-machine interaction, if you will, or human-human interaction. Is this that, in my opinion, is really about the challenge? And what we would like to achieve? Well, there is plenty of room in robotics and AI for all of us, all of you especially. Thank you very much.
Paolo, you become very intense, let's say, very intense, and including also on the dancing part, that robots that inject motion and make this motion harmonic and beautiful. One question, please, because we have the coffee break. Yes, Paolo, you want to do a question? No. No, it's you. Okay.
We can have the coffee break.
Right.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for the inspiring talk. Actually, you mentioned so many fundamental issues we are discussing these days regarding the relation of AI and robotics and the kind of AI we need on robotics. What do you think, what would be your advice actually to be more convincing on political level, in particular in Europe, that robotics is fundamental for understanding AI?
Yeah. Well, of course, it's a very good point. Actually, my suggestion is to consider intelligence in a holistic way, okay, in all together. So first of all, what is now magic, like deep learning, is very much related. Okay, the algorithms are more or less the same that were introduced 20 years ago. Of course, better. But was it the revolution is in data? And data come from physical sensor, for example, for the MEMS. Nobody is really thinking that the revolution is inside the bodies, okay, in MEMS. MEMS are physical objects that were not available 20 years ago, and today make the difference, also in robotics, because they consume very little energy, they are very reliable, they essentially have very good performance, they can communicate, so point one. Second point is about the role of body intelligence, okay? So we have intelligence in the physical object. I'm talking about body, but physical object that can be deformable, can be adaptive, can be reactive, are part of the vision of intelligence. And robotics is, of course, a lot of that. And then the third is about connection. Actually, AI takes benefit of the distributed processing capability that were not available years ago. So I believe that if you look at AI in this, I would say, integrated way, we are approaching this in a good way. And robotics, of course, that represent the physical interface with the world as a crucial role. Because processing is very important, you know, intelligence, in abstract intelligence is very important, but at the same time, action is very important, especially for humans, you know. In a society that is aging, you need more and more actions than just processing. So I would make this kind of argument, if you will.
Paolo, I get a permission to have one more question. So, thank you so much for always, as usual, inspiring presentation and opening too many questions, a lot of issues and questions. One thing I wanted to ask you about is the fact that ultimately we really need to think about multidisciplinarity in our approach to robotics. And this is clear. I mean, you're talking about sensors, material, mechatronics, but intelligence and distributed intelligence and all these different aspects. And I think in some universities we managed to do that, approaching robotics as a school, like in TUM, or approaching robotics as a department. But most of the time, robotics is done in one area. And this is really causing all kind of problems in terms of how we approach the general problem of robotics. So I wanted to see your feedback and what ways can be helping us towards bringing together the different disciplines into a research area related to intelligence and robotics.
Well, it's very, very complex question. Actually, I believe that many of us are doing this. Okay, for example, you have the X Center. You know, many institutes are trying to address the problem of not only robotics but also related, which is a very large number of disciplines, and I think this should be, how we say, inspiring also for other institutes that start maybe with a more focused opinion. And also journals, you know, like Science Robotics and other, or conferences. The point is really to make this idea, you know, robotics is not only a technology, that's the point. It is, but it is not only. It's one of the most fascinating areas of engineering, in fact, because it's the place, and this is the way why I'm so fascinated in robotics, because, and I try to share with you these ideas, is an area in which you can really address virtually anything, okay? So the challenge is not to become generic, you know, still be so still to adhere to a solution, but gradually to introduce more and more relations with other disciplines. I think we are doing. Actually, we are doing. Robotics is now considered as not only as a technology, but as a real leading engineering area, you know, attracting creative students, attracting creative investors. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. And looking back, we have done a lot.
Exciting.